Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the show. My name's Dr. Steve Simpson. I'm a medical doctor, but I work now exclusively as a mind coach with elite performers. In other words, with people just like you. So welcome again, and thank you for supporting the channel. Now, what have we got to talk about today? Well, I've got to tell you about my next event very briefly, because that does actually tie into the show by some synchronicity. The main headline topic is, of course, Carl Jung and his views on synchronicity, and they can be very powerful indeed. Indeed, I'm going to say right before I say anything else, these are not easy concepts to get across. They're not easy for me to describe to other people. They're not easy for me to understand. They're not easy for other people to understand. But the good news is you don't really need to understand too much. So the health advice for this show, as in fact for all of them, is please try to avoid overthinking, because overthinking comes from the ego. And Carl Jung was a student of Freud, so he would know all about the ego. And when I work with elite performers, that is probably the main thing that we work on, just quietening down the ego so that we can tap more easily into the massive creative power of our unconscious mind. And also, I've had a couple of questions posted in advance of the show, which on the same subject of synchronicity, and I'll do my best to answer those. So I'm assuming that you can all see and hear me okay. Please send me a little message if not, but everything is looking good from this end. So what does synchronicity mean? Well, to you and me, it'll probably mean something slightly different, but the common way people describe it is when they perhaps might think of a particular person one day, and then they'll get a phone call from them a couple of days later, and they haven't heard them for years, and then the third synchronicity might be that they'll meet them walking down the street. That's just a, fairly childish example, but I think we know what a synchronicity is. And Jung described it in, he was the one who coined this word, and I didn't know that until relatively recently, even though I've been using this word for a long time. Other words we use are luck, coincidence, serendipity. But Jung felt there was more to it than this. And as I mentioned, he had several different definitions of it during his career. I think he started off by saying it was a meaningful coincidence. So it wasn't a random event. There was something linking two things together, which shouldn't really have happened. But it did, and he didn't think that this was due to chance. He also called it a simultaneity, which is a pretty hard word to say, and it's perhaps easier because he also called it a falling together in time. So this all gets, it's starting to get a bit deep already, and trust me, it gets deeper yet. But as I said, it will become more simple by the end. Now, Carl Jung is famous for quite a few different things. He was an absolutely prolific writer, and he published many papers and books, and really kept on going until his death. I think he died in 1961, but I might be wrong about that. He's also very well known for his views on the collective unconscious, and as I might mention later on in this show, very much connected to synchronicity. We're not going to talk too much or at all about that tonight, but it will almost certainly be the topic of our next show, because the synchronicity, the collective unconscious, they go so well together. Synchronicities gained a lot of traction with people. Oddly enough, he's started talking, writing to himself in his journals about synchronicity in the 1920s. But it wasn't until 1951 in a lecture, which I think he gave down at Bart's Hospital, which is not too far away from where I am now in London, where he talked about it to a wider audience. And then he formally announced it to the world in a paper that he published the following year in 1952. So these ideas of his were 30 years in the making, And I wonder what stopped him. I have a feeling that what might have stopped him was he probably thought people weren't going to take him very seriously. And of course, a lot of people didn't. And to this day, a lot of people don't either. But I do. I think he was onto something. I think as we know more and more about these things, other people will come along and describe it in a more scientific way. But even so, his ideas have definitely helped me in my work and helped my clients, sometimes absolutely enormously. And so they can with you too. And this doesn't take a lifetime of study. Like I say, I'd like to think that you'll know a fair amount about synchronicity by the time we reach the end of this show. And then you have to start using it. And that's the tricky bit, because it takes a leap of faith. Let me tell you that. In more recent times, the band Police were very much into the work of Jung, and one of their albums was called Synchronicity. And as it so happened, I actually know the drummer of Police and almost worked for him because I worked with his brother. That was Andy Copeland. His brother was Ian Copeland. And on the cover of this album, I believe that Sting is actually reading a copy of one of Jung's books. And another musician called Davy Bowie, who was a thinker, to put it mildly. He was very much entranced by some of the work of Carl Jung. Jung himself, apart from saying that this synchronicity is where two events which apparently are not related, are causally related, are related on a different level, he used it as an explanation for the paranormal, because he was interested in many, many different subjects, and the paranormal was one. He was interested in many different philosophies and many different religions. And it's very hard to just understand how he managed to get through all of the work that he did. And this was before the age of the internet and Wikipedia and all of the facilities and an ability to communicate with people across the world that we have. So how does it help us? Well, if perhaps here this might be a good opportunity for me to put in a couple of the questions that I've received earlier today before the show. And I could start with this one, which says, should we take synchronicity as a positive affirmation? Well, my view on it is that, I mean, I do believe in synchronicity. I mean, these things have happened to me so many times. I mean, I have an open mind about anything, as I've mentioned before, but I wouldn't be talking about this in show number 12 if I didn't think it was important. So I would say, in answer to this question, should you take it as a positive affirmation? Maybe that's slightly too strong a way of putting it, but I think you're definitely on the right track. I take it, when a synchronicity happens to me, I definitely take it as a good thing. I take it as a sign that I am on the right track, and I take comfort from it because I know that sooner or later this synchronicity is going to show itself up and result in something that I probably at this moment couldn't think of. Now, a fairly small example happened yesterday afternoon. I met an old friend of mine from medical school, and we went out to dinner and we chatted about a few things. And we chatted about the possibility of doing an event together, and we couldn't see how it was going to work. It was a little more than a little complicated to make this thing work. But my parting words were, don't worry about it. Let's just see what happens over the next week or two. Well, nothing's happened today, but we will see. It's early days. The other thing I was going to say is that Einstein is involved in Carl Jung's life. And I mentioned at the beginning of the program that we're doing a show tomorrow in Little Venice in London. It's in the Canal Cafe Theatre starting at 7:30. Get Lucky with Einstein. And I'm presenting it with fellow author Hugh Shields, who in fact came to one of my meetup groups in London and apparently was inspired by something I said. What I said was, to get lucky, you have to put yourself in the game. Well, there you are. That's pretty inspirational, wasn't it? Actually, I didn't think it was at the time, but it certainly seemed to be for Hugh. Anyway, he went and wrote a book Hawking and Einstein go to dinner. And our show tomorrow is called Get Lucky Now with Einstein. And definitely synchronicity is going to be somewhere there in the show. And if any of you want to go, well, if you send me a little note, and if I'm in a particularly good mood at the end of the show, I might put your name on the guest list. So that's, as I said, Canal Cafe Theatre, 7:30 tomorrow night, Friday. So how can we take synchronicity a step further? Well, I think it's a gateway to the collective unconscious, which I said I wasn't going to mention, but the two are definitely very closely together. And how does it relate to Einstein? Well, the funny thing is that Jung came from Austria, and so did Einstein, and they knew each other, and they exchanged a lot of correspondence, and they had dinner together, and they talked about these things, and Einstein was interested too. And this was when Einstein was starting his work on quantum theory. And Jung and Einstein just wondered if this might be explained in terms of quantum theory, which was a rapidly evolving science. I'm not sure that Einstein necessarily thought that he would, but he was intrigued enough to be open to the idea. And this is when his favorite phrase to describe this was spooky action at a distance, which he described as currently unexplained. But Einstein wasn't the only influential and talented person that Carl Jung knew. He also knew a fellow Austrian physicist by the name of Pauli, Wolfgang Pauli. And funnily enough, Wolfgang Pauli worked in quantum physics as well. And indeed, he won a Nobel Prize for it, as did Einstein himself. It wasn't the theory of relativity that he won the prize for, although many people say that he should. And Pauli himself became perhaps even more interested than Einstein, and it started, in fact, because he was a patient of Carl Jung's. So I suppose that gave Carl Jung an entree into Professor Pauli's brain. Another question that I had was, I already feel very lucky. How do I keep it? Well, this channel is about luck. And in my book, Get Lucky Now, I mentioned that the subtitle is The 7 Secrets of Lucky People. And 6 of these secrets are pretty logical, quite frankly. And they are things that you might be doing already, and you might not. If you're not, you definitely should be. And if you're doing them a little bit, you should be doing them a bit more, because they will make you lucky. It's almost guaranteed. The 7th chapter is the book called Magic. And when people flick through my book, they say, oh, tell us what's in the magic chapter. And I have to politely refuse and say, sorry, this is not one of these things where you can go straight from A to Z. You have to go on a little bit of a journey, what Jung would have called an individuation. And so that is why I don't answer that question. But in the chapter on magic, I will just tell you a little bit about it. This is definitely where I start talking about synchronicity and quantum theory and string theory, and even some of the ideas that Stephen Hawking has. So that's just a little taster for that. Before I answer the question, I've just got another little comment come up here. Okay, Margaret's joined us. Hola. I think Margaret's joined us from Spain. Lucky you. But it's a bit warmer there than it has been in London today. So back to the question, I already feel very lucky. How do I keep it? Well, I mentioned at the start, don't overthink stuff. So to the person who put this question in, I would say, if you're already feeling lucky, if it ain't broke, I wouldn't fix it. I wouldn't try and fix it. I would just carry on doing what you're doing, because you're probably doing at least 6 of these things already, and probably 7. Now, if you had asked your question, rather than saying, how do I keep it? How can I be luckier still? Well, then definitely I would listen pretty carefully to what I have to say. I would listen pretty carefully with your unconscious mind, because this is where vague, abstract ideas like synchronicity get processed. That's why I said earlier on, you don't need to worry about understanding it. As long as you can accept that synchronicity is there, as long as you can accept that it just might work the way I've suggested, and as long as you can accept that it just might work for you, then that's probably all that unconscious mind needs to join the dots together. So how far do you trust it? I suppose this was the earlier question. Should we take synchronicity as a positive affirmation? We should trust it, but we shouldn't put our life savings on it. As I say, to me, it's like a gentle tap on the shoulder or a bit of a nudge saying, yeah, you're going in the right direction, keep going. And to keep going is a pretty good lesson for anybody in life, because I don't really know offhand of anybody who's been highly successful without straight away. Most people have had to put in the hours and the work. They probably wouldn't describe it like that because, of course, as we've mentioned in previous shows, they're following their passion. And that, by the way, is one of the 7 things that Einstein would have said to the 14-year-old daughter if he'd had one. So don't put your life savings on it, but just trust it and see what turns up. Just as in next week's show, assuming we do the collective unconscious, which we probably will, why you don't have to really understand some of Jung's complex ideas on what that was, but just accept that it's there. And just accept, if you want to have a more scientific take on it, that there's a lot more going on in your mind than you can ever understand. It's just like so many of the things in our body that are going on all the time that we're unaware of, and that we take for granted, and we don't need to worry about it. You see, right now I'm sitting in a chair, I'm balanced, all of my arms and my legs are all moving slightly, my head is moving slightly, my mouth is moving. I'm not thinking about any of these things, and if I really tried to keep everything still, you'd notice it was pretty strange. Just as that I'm not worried that the gravity here in London is suddenly going to disappear and I'm going to go flying off into space. Gravity is always here. So is the power of your unconscious mind. And that should be a considerable reassurance to you because there's already too much going on in your conscious mind, or roughly speaking, your ego. As I mentioned, when people start overthinking, when people start putting pressure on themselves, when people start looking at the scoreboard, when people start thinking, is somebody watching me do this? Am I being criticized for this? Am I good enough? These are all things that will take people away from peak performance, take people away from their flow state. So how can you avoid that? Well, you can go a long way just by accepting what I've said, just may be true and may apply to you. You can spend a little bit of time, at least a little bit of time every day, focusing on mindfulness and being more mindful. And I think we've covered this in a previous show. If not, I do recommend you have a look at my website and sign up in particular for my YouTube channel, because last time I checked, I think there's about 170 or 180 videos on there, and many of them are on these kind of subjects. So that is probably about enough for the moment. If anybody has any questions, now is your time to post them. I'm just trying to check that I haven't forgotten anything, and I don't think that I have. So I wish you the best of luck with synchronicity. I'd be really interested to hear about any of yours. I like to collect examples. I have many of my own. I collect them from my clients. And of course, you're only going to notice a synchronicity if you notice it. I know that's a very simplistic statement, but it's true. When I'm asked to describe my book in one word, the word that I would use is intuition. All of the 7 secrets that I talk about, all the methods that I use with my clients, They do many different things at many different levels, but probably the most important is it makes people more intuitive. That's why I say I don't actually put anything in anybody else's head. I don't produce their results. I just allow them to tap in to what is already there, which they were unaware of. And if we can quiet an ego mind, then we become more intuitive and we spot opportunities and we spot synchronicities. So that's enough for me today. This show will be downloaded and available, available for you to watch again, or for people who are late, probably within the next couple of hours and possibly even sooner. So in the meantime, have lots of synchronicities until this time next week. And I wish you an enormous amount of luck. And please spread it around other people in the world, because we all need it at the moment. Okay, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Goodbye.